All of us once again. It gives me a great sense of duty to present to you all the outcomes of the report on the 2020 and 2024 election violence which occurred across various centers in the country. Ladies and gentlemen, elections in Ghana in recent times have been characterized by violence in various forms. In 2020 and 2024 general elections, we recorded some isolated incidents such as violence resulting in loss of lives. To address this recurrent and bring justice to the victims, the President, His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, directed the formation of a special investigative task force to re-examine cases of electoral violence, fatalities, identify the causes, hold perpetrators accountable, and propose measures to prevent further occurrence. On January 16, 2025, the Inspector General of Police inaugurated a special task force within the Criminal Investigation Department, CID, of the Ghana Police Service. The mandate of the task force was to collaborate with the stakeholders to identify, review, and investigate all electoral violence cases that resulted in fatalities during the 2020 and 2024 general election. Was identified 12 cases that took place during the 2020 and 2024 general election. These cases had resulted in 15 deaths across the country and well over 40 individuals got injured. The report outlined detailed account of all the 12 cases recorded during the period. The detailed report, which has been submitted to His Excellency the President, also contains the various incidents, how they were brought or got to the notice of the police, and actions taken by investigators in line with the laid down investigation protocol and procedure. The report further detailed action taken when the Special Investigative Task Force took over the cases at level initially investigators had reached, and detailed findings derived from further interviews, interrogations, field visits, reconstruction of crime and crime scene, and forensic analysis of various materials of evidence retrieved during the investigation. Various criminal offenses which will have been committed by different persons involved. The report took into account a number of incidents where some procedural actions were overlooked. There were instances of clear breaches of discipline, violation of legal requirement, and total neglect by officers who were either present or responsible for situations that required prompt, responsive actions. The focus is to avoid veering into areas that might confuse procedural breaches with the main mandate, which is to investigate, identify, and prosecute persons responsible for death during the two general elections in the years of the 2020 and 2024. There were also instances of persons being rushed to the court on frivolous and vexatious charges when the same incident had resulted in the death of a person or two. Great effort was expended to distill these charges and identify persons against whom evidence could be produced for the deaths recorded during these elections, with evidence to sustain criminal charges being preferred against them. On-site inspections and stakeholders interview. The Special Investigative Task Force identified 12 specific cases. I must be quick to add that I have since directed that the report of the Commission on the Election Violence at Ayawaso West Wibble be implemented fully for justice to prevail. 6 each from the 2020 and the 2024 general election, which collectively led to 15 deaths as mentioned earlier and injured 40 others. These incidents span multiple regions, including Bono East, Greater Accra region, Bono region, Northern region, Central region, Savannah, and Asante region. The circumstances of each case vary, but nearly all involve the use of firearms during confrontation between supporters of the two major political parties and instances where security personnel resorted to the use of live ammunition, warning shots as means of crowd control. Investigation into one of the cases during the 2020 general election at Odo was completed. The Attorney General is currently prosecuting 3 persons who are standing trials at the High Court Criminal Division, Accra. The investigation established that 3 of the cases resulting in 4 deaths are traceable to the use of firearms by armed police patrol teams. Military personnel were also found to be responsible for 3 of the cases resulting in the death of 3 persons when they intervened to restore calm to chaotic crowds. Of the cases, which resulted in 5 deaths, were recorded when party enthusiastic supporters resorted to the use of firearms against their opponent. The 2 other cases involve persons who were lynched during confrontation between supporters of the 2 major parties. It is worth noting that 21 suspects have been identified through witness interview, scene visit, reconstruction of crime and crime scene, and forensic and ballistic examination of material of evidence relevant to the cases. 11 new dockets have been built on the cases. 4 of the identified suspects have been arrested and admitted to police inquiry bills to facilitate further investigation and to trace their accomplices. 5 other identified suspects have been remanded in prison custody. Warrants of arrest have been procured to facilitate the arrest of some of the identified suspects who are on the run. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the press, the 2020 investigation reports are as follows. Techima South, that's Techima South constituency in Techima. The observation of the task force are as follows: that the injury could have been avoided had the security personnel not resorted to the use of live ammunition for crowd control. The use of firearms by security personnel was not done under the command of a senior officer who could have ensured that appropriate rules of engagement were observed. Security personnel, especially the police patrol teams at the collation center, fired indiscriminately, and in some cases, they directed fire at the escaping crowd. As in the case of the Techima, immediately the day after the election, it rained heavily, and so they couldn't pick much from the scene. And no bullets or projectiles were retrieved from the bodies of the deceased to assist ballistic examination to identify which weapon caused the injuries or death. It made it difficult to bring finality as to who actually caused the injury and death for now. However, investigation will continue until justice is done. The recommendation from the task force was that the crowd control response of security personnel by resorting to the firing of live arms and also directing fire at the escaping crowd is not acceptable. The victims of the gunshots have suffered injuries that cause them pain, loss of resources for treatment, as well as income. Families have also lost breadwinners. The state should take steps to the state should take up the responsibility to compensate the families who lost their breadwinners, as well as those who suffered injuries. Police should receive orientation and desist from using lethal force in crowd control situations. Appropriate crowd control gear should be provided to security services. Party executives, officials, and persons involved in election management should be well educated on the provision of the Anti-Vigilante Act 2019 Act 999. Action taken so far on the Techima. The report has been forwarded to the Attorney General for the compensation to be given to the families of the deceased and the injured. Dockets of the case is also referred to the cold case unit of the CID police, meaning that the investigation will continue further until we are able to find the actual perpetrators. The observation of the task force, special task force, is that investigations into the incident failed to identify the person who shot and killed the deceased, Richard Otu and Emmanuel Dompre. However, 3 identified persons by police as those who fired shot into the crowd and injuring them were charged with the offenses of conspiracy to commit murder contrary to the Section 23(1) and 47 of the Criminal Offences Act 1960 Act 29, and attempted murder, contrary to Section 48 of the same Act. They have been committed and are standing trial at the High Court, Criminal Court 1, Accra. The recommendation of the task force is that the task force recommend monetary compensation to the families of the deceased. The injured must abide by the judgment of the court in the trial, after which compensation, if any, may be determined. So the actions that we've taken so far on this is that same report has been forwarded to the Attorney General for the workout of compensation to the deceased family. The docket is also at the cold case unit, since we've not been able to actually get those who fired the shot that killed the two citizens. For police church. The observation of the task force is that investigation revealed that the soldiers were interviewed and showed video of a man dressed in military uniform and reported to be the person who fired, resulting in the death of Abbas Ibrahim, but they maintained that the said soldier was not known to them. The case involved accused Collins Kweku, alias Kola, who was charged with causing harm and use of offensive weapon is still pending before the Circuit Court 4, Accra. The use of armed military personnel for crowd control duties accounted for the incident that led to the death of one person and injured 4 others. Police personnel were present at the center and should have controlled the crowd. Lack of coordination between the police and the military men who were on duty accounted for the situation in which the military resorted to the use of live ammunition to attempt to control the crowd. The incident was avoidable because the agitation and shouting by the party supporters were outside the collection center. The action of police was a criminal offense. The recommendation of the task force is that election security management should be coordinated properly to determine when force is required for crowd control. The use of military in crowd control activity should cease if death resulting from high-handedness of state security are to be avoided. Police ahead of election, a well-coordinated plan on election security management. There should be controlled use of military. There should be controlled use of live ammunition from lethal weapons as a means of scaring or driving crowd from a particular location. Capacity building is recommended for police and all arm-bearing security agencies whenever required for election security or crowd control duties. Compensation should be paid to the injured and to the family of the late Ibrahim Abbas. The action that we have taken since the report came is to forward that to the Attorney General for compensation of both the deceased family and those who got injured. The docket is also forwarded to the cold case unit of the CID, since that soldier or the one in the uniform has still not been identified. The Banda Ahipro, that's in the Bunu region. Taking into consideration the advice from the Attorney General's office, the task force recommend the following. The investigation continues even though the township are not willing to give information out because of the rivalry between the two towns of Banda Ahipro and Banda Bonkazi, but the docket should be forwarded to the cold case unit. The monetary compensation should be paid to the family of the late Silas Wolankami. Report forwarded to the AG for compensation to the deceased family. Doma West constituency, that's in Grand Kwanta. This was also violence resulting from the 2020 voter registration mop-up exercise. The task force recommends that the supporters of both NDC and NPP who convened at the voter registration center near the district assembly premises on August 8, 2020 were engaged in riot. They were, however, not attacking the police or security personnel at the center. The use of live ammunition to disperse the riotous crowd by the police was inappropriate and does not conform to any laid-down crowd control method. No police officer or security detail at the registration center was under attack for his or her life to be in immediate danger. The task force therefore recommends that the family of the deceased, Kofi Robert alias Kofi Labet, be compensated. Victims, Ilyasu Gabriel and Kwame Datan, should also be compensated based on the extent of injury suffered as a result of what appears on their medical report form. In the Sovereignty as Northern region, the observation of the task force is that there was no confrontation between MPP and NDC supporters before the shot was fired into the crowd. However, NDC supporters were jubilating and firing gunshots and throwing firecrackers. Again, it was established without doubt that the bullet that killed the deceased, Samira Zakaria, was a shot from a high-velocity rifle. The same bullet also caused injuries to other 3 persons. There are 2 possibilities. The first is that the shot must have been fired into the crowd by one of the persons who were jubilating deliberately or accidentally. And the second alternative is that someone with the intention to kill or injure the jubilants infiltrated into the jubilation crowd and fired the fatal shot. The task force recommends that the family of the deceased be compensated for their loss. The 3 other injured persons should also be compensated based on their medical report and for pain and loss suffered as a result of the injuries. And here again, because as they couldn't establish exactly who fired the shot, the docket is also returned to the cold case unit of the Ghana Police Service for further or for future investigation or further investigation. So 2024 election violent cases. Yes, that's Kasua. The task force observed that the Honorable Phyllis Koyo Okeno denied that her convoy was attacked. She was nowhere near the scene of the incident. Persons who were involved in the incident have avoided speaking with the task force, while Muhammad Ali and others who were in the Mahindra pickup truck and fired shots from their vehicle have also avoided speaking with the task force. So their opinion have not been established. Muhammad Ali is said to have been flown abroad for further treatment. The late Yusuf Larry Idris died from a gunshot, and those who were in the Mahindra pickup with him know what happened. The driver of the Mahindra has been traced and further investigation is ongoing. The task force will continue with the investigation. Tolong constituency, that's Yankala. The observation of the task force is that there is the presence of sophisticated weapons in the Tolong and Yankala communities, and the level of sophistication is a matter of pride among the youth in particular. Money was distributed on the UDS campus for vote buying on the said election day, that's 2024. The allegation of vote buying was not reported to the EC officials or the security agencies. Security response to the violence was very swift and decisive. Suspect Alhaji Yakubu Abdul Latif Kopshi and Sankara led a team of armed men to Yankala and engaged in indiscriminate firing of guns, during which the late Shaibu Haruna was killed and 5 others were injured. The task force recommends that suspects Alhaji Yakubu Abdul Latif Kopshi and Sankara are being pursued and will be arrested, investigated and prosecuted. They have all fled the community. The family of the late Shaibu Haruna and those who suffered injuries should be compensated by the state. The National Small Arms Commission, other state authorities and traditional leaders should sensitize the members of the 2 communities of Tolong and Yankala on the dangers associated with the kind of weapons being held by individuals and the right channel to follow when offended by others. By police during the stop and search exercise conducted immediately after the incident, they should be discharged while efforts are directed at arresting those who actually engaged in the firing. The regional police commander should engage the district officer, the PID director, and officers in the region to assist in the arrest of the suspect, Alhaji Yakubu Abdul Latif Kopshi, and his gang in order to hasten prosecution. The report has been forwarded to the AG for the compensation to the deceased family and the injured. Damango constituency at Damango. The observation of the task force is that supporters were unruly, riotous, and caused damage to property and threatened life. When the rampaging crowd saw the police firing warning shot and started fleeing, the police did not have need to direct their shot at the escaping crowd. It was one such shot that killed the late Sabrina Mukaila. Secondly, there was rioting at the collection center and damage was caused to property and electoral material. The recommendation of the task force is that the family of the deceased person be compensated by the state. The suspects arrested are currently being prosecuted at the High Court in Kumasi. The report has been forwarded to the Attorney General for the compensation to the deceased family. Nkuranza South constituency in Nkuranza. The observation of the task force is that there were 16 soldiers involved, and when they were screened, 5 have been identified as being in the group who were present during the incident. One soldier, Last Corporal Dakwa Damina Ochre, who was identified as having shot the late Abdul Karim Rafiq alias Tyson, admitted shooting him but testified his action by saying that he saw the deceased trying to disarm his colleague, that's Private Boahin Francis, and that the deceased had drawn a cutlass to slash his colleague. Private Boahin Francis, who could not collate this evidence in full since he was trying to pick up the magazine of his M16 rifle, which had fallen during the struggle when he heard the shot. The evidence collected so far does not show that the deceased committed any breach of the law. The military personnel who were deployed to the collation center had a duty to prevent any interference with the electoral process, and they were also required to maintain and restore peace whenever disorder threatened. The recommendation of the task force is that the family of the Abdul Karim Rafiq be compensated for the untimely death of the deceased. Yet the report too has been forwarded to the Attorney General for advice and the compensation because it involves this soldier that is well established that he really fired the shot. So that has been forwarded to the Attorney General for Madam. The task force realized that the incident led to the loss of 2 persons and injured 2 others. The observation of the task force is that the late Jacob Nalo was not in the group that went to take over the fertilizer in the warehouse. The late Solomon Debel lost his life as a result of stray bullets. The task force, through discreet investigation, identified 12 suspects as those who attacked and subsequently lynched deceased Jacob Nlo. 5 of the 12 have been arrested and before the Kumasi High Court for Kumasi and are currently in prison custody, yet to meet their bail condition. The others are on the run, and the police is making every effort to get them arrested to face justice. For Southwest, that's Mankranso. The observation of the task force was that a chaotic situation at the collation center caused damage to property and almost brought the collation process to a halt. There was therefore the need for the military men to intervene. However, directing rifle shots at the crowd cannot be an acceptable crowd control method, since it endangers the life of fleeing youth and bystanders, including the late Dominic Nimo, who was standing at a distance. The 4 victims who sustained gunshot injuries deny being involved in creating the chaos. They claim to be standing some distance away when they were hit by the bullet. In the screening exercise, 11 soldiers were identified as those detailed at the constituency center in Mankranso on the December 7, 2024. 8 of the soldiers interviewed admitted firing warning shots alongside the police to disperse the mob, which was attacking the collation center. They denied firing into the crowd and further said that they were not aware that anybody was hit by a bullet during the process. There was no doubt that the late Dominic Nimo died from the shot fired by the soldiers. Similarly, the 4 victims also got their injuries through the same process. President John Dramani Mahama, is committed to upholding the rule of law and to ensuring that all those responsible for the violence are held accountable. Government will continue to work with all stakeholders to strengthen democratic institutions and ensure that elections in the country are peaceful. God bless our homeland Ghana and make it great and strong. I want to thank you once again, especially the Honorable Minister. Thank you so much. Service officers, the military and the police to embark on what you call it, an election activity. The recommendation is that why not let them train together? Let them have a coordination. They will have a coordination among themselves. Don't give gadgets to only the superior officers. Make sure that all those who are on the election activity are holding the gadgets so they can communicate effectively. All these things are part of the recommendation that they have made. But because, like I said, the process is not comprehensive and is not completed, and we are already looking at it, and I can assure you, you can see that because they submitted their first report just around the time that we finished the by-election, when we're going to Abuja, we fully implemented some of the recommendations that the Special Task Force has made. So I can assure you, as the Minister of Interior, under the leadership of His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, we are not going to make this a kind of one-off thing, the usual thing, when something happens, then we just talk about it, sign, create some report, and then allow the report to be creating dust, and then that marks the end of it. No, we can assure you that you can see from the work that they are doing. We are empowering them, we are giving them the resources, and I can bet you, the team, I can see some of the members of the special team here, because they are at CIDs, I don't need to mention their names. And they'll tell you, I even took the pain to meet them, to encourage them, to let them know they have my full backing and the backing of His Excellency John Dramani Mahama to carry out this function without fear or favor. And to have imagined that even the army have to cooperate with them, because in all, 50 men from the military were interrogated by the task force. It tells you that we really, really want to bring this matter to an end by making sure that all the perpetrators are dealt with.